Your Honor, there's an urgent letter that requires your immediate attention. The court clerk's trembling voice cut through Judge Victoria Ashford's tirade like a knife. In 90 seconds, everything she'd built over 24 years on the bench would come crashing down. The oak-paneled walls of Courtroom 7C in the Riverside County Courthouse absorbed sound like a tomb. Judge Victoria Ashford sat elevated behind her mahogany bench, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched the severity of her expression. At 62 years old, she ruled her courtroom with an iron fist wrapped in judicial robes. 17-year-old Jasmine Carter stood at the defendant's table, her posture straight despite the oversized hoodie that swallowed her thin frame. Her sneakers were held together with duct tape. Her jeans had been washed so many times the denim was nearly white at the knees. But her eyes held something that made everyone uncomfortable. Intelligence. Fire. Refusal to be diminished. Public Defender Rachel Kim shuffled through a stack of papers that threatened to topple over. At 34, Rachel had been handling juvenile cases for 6 years, and she'd learned to recognize when a judge had already made up their mind. Today, Judge Ashford's mind was made up before Jasmine even walked through the door. "Ms. Carter," Judge Ashford began, her voice carrying the particular contempt reserved for repeat offenders. "This is your 4th appearance before this court in 18 months. Truancy, petty theft, vandalism, and now we have breaking and entering at Westfield Preparatory Academy." Jasmine kept her gaze forward, her jaw set. In the gallery behind her, her grandmother, Dorothy Carter, sat in the second row clutching a worn leather purse. At 73, Dorothy had raised Jasmine since she was 3 years old, working double shifts at the nursing home to keep food on the table. The circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and endless worry. "Look at me when I address you, young lady," Ashford snapped. Jasmine slowly raised her eyes to meet the judge's. What passed between them in that moment was electric, 2 women from different worlds, different generations, different realities, locked in an unspoken battle of wills. "Better," Ashford said, though her tone suggested nothing was better at all. "Now, Ms. Carter, I've reviewed your file extensively. Your pattern of behavior indicates a complete disregard for authority, for property, and for your own future." In the third row of the gallery, 21-year-old college student Keisha Martinez felt something twist in her stomach. She'd come to observe court proceedings for her criminal justice class, but this felt wrong. Very wrong. She pulled out her phone, opened Instagram, and tapped the Go Live button. "Live, Judge vs. Teen in Riverside Court, this is intense. Viewers, 3. 18, 67. 134. Your Honor," Rachel Kim interjected carefully, rising from her seat. "If I might provide some context regarding my client's circumstances." "Ms. Kim, I've read your brief." Ashford waved her hand dismissively, the gesture of someone swatting away an annoying insect. "It's filled with justifications and excuses. What I'm interested in are facts. And the facts are these. Your client was discovered at 10:47 p.m. on the grounds of Westfield Preparatory Academy, a private institution where she is not enrolled, in an unauthorized area. Security footage shows her attempting to access locked classrooms. Your Honor, she wasn't attempting to break in. If you'd allow me to explain." "What needs explaining, Ms. Kim?" Ashford's voice rose slightly. "The security report is quite clear." "Are you suggesting the security footage is fabricated?" Rachel's hands tightened around her papers. "No, Your Honor, but the context of why she was there is crucial to understanding. The context is irrelevant when the action is illegal." Ashford turned her attention back to Jasmine. "Ms. Carter, let me paint a picture for you. You're 17 years old with a record that would make criminals twice your age blush. You live in the Riverside Gardens housing project." Dorothy gasped softly from the gallery. The way Ashford said housing project made it sound like a prison sentence. "With your grandmother, who I'm sure is doing her best, but clearly it's not enough. No father in the picture, mother whereabouts unknown, probably involved in substances." "Your Honor." Rachel shot to her feet. "This is completely inappropriate. my client's family situation has no bearing on. Everything has bearing in my courtroom, Ms. Kim. Sit down. Ashford's gavel came down with a sharp crack. I've been on this bench for 24 years. I've seen hundreds of cases exactly like this one. Troubled teen from a broken home in a rough neighborhood makes poor choices and then acts surprised when there are consequences. Keisha's phone was burning hot in her hand. The viewer count was climbing exponentially. Viewers, 1,856. 3,742, 6,891. 11,234. The comments were flooding in faster than she could read them. Did she just say broken home? This judge is wilding. Is this real? Someone save this girl, I'm recording this. Jasmine's hands, which had been resting calmly on the defendant's table, slowly curled into fists. Not aggressive fists, controlled fists. The kind of fists that came from holding back words that desperately wanted to be spoken. Ms. Carter, Ashford continued, leaning forward like a hawk zeroing in on prey. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Any explanation for why you thought it was acceptable to trespass on private property in the middle of the night? Jasmine opened her mouth, then closed it. Rachel put a gentle hand on her arm, silently pleading with her not to speak. But Jasmine pulled her arm away softly and stood. I have something to say, Your Honor. The courtroom went deathly silent. Ashford's eyebrows rose in an expression that mixed surprise with disdain. Oh? Please, enlighten us. I'm sure we're all eager to hear another excuse. It's not an excuse, Jasmine said, her voice steady despite the tremor Rachel could see in her hands. It's the truth. But based on the last 10 minutes, I don't think you're interested in the truth. You're interested in a story you've already written in your head. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Dorothy covered her mouth with her hand, torn between pride in her granddaughter's courage and terror at the consequences. Judge Ashford's face flushed red. Excuse me? Young lady, do you understand that you are addressing a judge? Do you understand the concept of contempt of court? I understand it perfectly, Your Honor. Jasmine's voice didn't waver. Just like I understand that you've been talking about me for the past 15 minutes like I'm not even a person. Like I'm just a statistic. Another poor black girl from the projects who's going nowhere. Ms. Carter, Rachel tried to intervene, but Jasmine was done being quiet. You talked about my grandmother like she's failing me. You talked about my home like it's a disease. You made up an entire story about my mother without knowing anything about her. You decided who I am without asking me a single question about why I was at Westfield Prep. Ashford's knuckles were white as she gripped her gavel. I don't need to ask questions when the evidence is clear. You were trespassing. Security found you where you had no right to be. Those are facts, not stories. Then let me add some more facts to your collection, Jasmine said, reaching into her hoodie pocket. Bailiff Marcus Johnson moved forward instinctively, his hand moving toward his belt. I'm just getting my phone, Jasmine said clearly, moving slowly and deliberately. She pulled out a cracked iPhone with a screen protector held together by tape. I want to show you something. Put that away immediately, Ashford commanded. No electronic devices in my courtroom. It's evidence, Your Honor, Jasmine replied. Evidence of why I was at Westfield Preparatory Academy. Rachel was frantically scrolling through documents on her laptop, her face growing paler by the second. She clicked on a link, read something, and her mouth fell open. Ms. Carter, Ashford said with exaggerated patience. Whatever is on that phone doesn't change the fact that you were trespassing on private property after hours. I was there by invitation. The words hung in the recycled air of the courtroom like a challenge thrown down on ancient dueling grounds. Ashford laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Invitation? To trespass? Ms. Carter, if you're going to lie, at least make it believable. I'm not lying. Jasmine held up her phone, turning it so the screen faced the bench. I was invited by Headmaster Dr. Benjamin Caldwell to use the Advanced Robotics Lab after hours. I don't have access to that kind of equipment anywhere else. Robotics lab? Ashford's tone made it clear she found this as believable as claims of alien abduction. Ms. Carter, let's be realistic about your capabilities and your future. With your record, you should be focused on finishing high school, if you can manage that, not playing with expensive equipment you have no business touching. Playing? For the first time, real anger flashed in Jasmine's eyes. Your Honor, I'm not playing. I'm building. Building what, exactly? A prototype for a water purification system that can be manufactured using recycled materials and powered by solar energy. It's designed for communities without reliable access to clean water. The courtroom went silent again, but this time it was different. This time, people were leaning forward instead of back. Ashford recovered quickly. That's a very creative story, Ms. Carter, but it's not a story. Jasmine's voice rose for the first time, frustration cracking through her carefully maintained composure. It's my project. It's my work. It's my life. Ms. Carter, control yourself, Ashford warned. How? Jasmine asked, and now there were tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. How am I supposed to control myself when you won't even listen? When you've decided everything about me based on where I live and what I look like? Dorothy was crying now, silent tears streaming down her weathered face. Marcus Johnson, the bailiff who'd worked in this courtroom for 12 years, shifted uncomfortably. He'd never seen Judge Ashford like this. Keisha's live stream had exploded. Viewers, 28,467. 45,891. 67,234. 89,456. News outlets were starting to pick it up. Local reporters were texting each other. Someone had created a hashtag Justice for Jasmine. Your Honor, Rachel Kim's voice cut through the tension. She was standing now, laptop in hand, her expression a mixture of shock and vindication. I need to approach the bench. Immediately. Ms. Kim, we're in the middle of. Your Honor, this is critical information that directly impacts these proceedings. I insist. Something in Rachel's tone made even Ashford pause. Fine. Approach. Rachel walked to the bench, turned her laptop screen toward the judge, and pointed. Ashford leaned forward, squinting at the screen. Her expression went from annoyed to confused to something that might have been concern. This is. Ashford started, then stopped. That's my client, Your Honor, Rachel said quietly but firmly. That article is from 3 months ago. MIT Technology Review. Perhaps you'd like to read the headline? Ashford's lips moved as she read silently. The color slowly drained from her face. Rachel returned to the defendant's table, but before she could sit down, Jasmine spoke again. Your Honor, would you like me to tell you why Headmaster Caldwell invited me to Westfield Prep? Ashford looked up from the laptop screen, and for the first time since the hearing began, she didn't have an immediate response. Because 4 months ago, Jasmine continued, her voice steady again, I won the National Youth Engineering Competition. My water purification prototype beat over 2,000 other entries from across the country. The prize was $50,000 in grant funding and access to advanced facilities for further development. She tapped her phone screen and held it up again. This time, the image showed Jasmine in a formal dress, holding a trophy that was nearly as tall as she was, shaking hands with a woman in a business suit. That's Dr. Sarah Chen, Chief Innovation Officer at the Environmental Protection Agency, Jasmine explained. She's been mentoring me for the past 3 months. She's the one who connected me with Headmaster Caldwell because his school has one of the only robotics labs in the state with the equipment I need. The gallery was buzzing now. Dorothy had both hands over her mouth, tears streaming freely. Other people in the audience were pulling out their phones, searching for information, confirming what Jasmine was saying. Rachel pulled up another window on her laptop. Your Honor, I have copies of the competition results, Dr. Chen's mentorship agreement, and Headmaster Caldwell's written permission for Jasmine to access the facilities. All of this was submitted in our initial brief, which I respectfully suggest you didn't read thoroughly. Ashford's jaw tightened. Ms. Kim, I read every brief that crosses my desk. Then you know that my client wasn't trespassing. You know that she had explicit permission to be there. You know that the security guard who called the police was new and didn't have the updated access list. Rachel's voice was getting stronger, more confident. And you know that everything you've said for the past 20 minutes has been based on assumptions rather than facts. Before Ashford could respond, the courtroom door opened with a loud creak that made everyone turn. Court Clerk Margaret Sullivan entered, moving with unusual urgency for a woman who'd spent 32 years in the courthouse and thought she'd seen everything. In her hands was a manila envelope with a seal that made several people in the gallery gasp. Your Honor. Margaret's voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, everyone heard every word. There's an urgent letter that requires your immediate attention. Not now, Margaret, Ashford said, though her voice lacked its earlier authority. Can't you see I'm in the middle of proceedings? Your Honor. Margaret climbed the steps to the bench, something she never did during active court sessions. This came by Federal Courier 3 minutes ago. It's marked urgent and confidential. She held out the envelope. The seal was unmistakable, the seal of the President of the United States. Ashford's hand trembled slightly as she reached for it. The what? The White House, Your Honor. Margaret's whisper carried through the deathly silent courtroom. The letter concerns Ms. Jasmine Carter. Every phone in the gallery was up now. Keisha's live stream viewer count hit 150,000. The comments were exploding. The White House? And oh way this judge is done, I'm recording everything, this is history, someone call CNN. Judge Victoria Ashford sat frozen, the presidential envelope in her shaking hands. She looked down at it, then up at Jasmine Carter, 17 years old, standing in duct-taped sneakers and a worn hoodie, with her head held high. And for the first time in 24 years on the bench, Judge Victoria Ashford realized she had made a terrible, career-ending mistake. Her fingers fumbled with the seal. The paper inside was thick, official, intimidating. She pulled it out with hands that shook like autumn leaves in a storm. The letterhead was unmistakable, The White House, Washington, D.C. She read the first line. Her eyes widened. She read the second line. Her face went white. She read the third line. She looked up at Jasmine with an expression of pure horror. This can't be. Her voice was barely a whisper. Jasmine spoke quietly, but every person in that courtroom heard her. Your Honor, would you like to know what else happened after I won the National Youth Engineering Competition? Ashford couldn't speak. She could only stare at the letter, then at Jasmine, then back at the letter. The President of the United States invited me to the White House, Jasmine said. To present my work at the National Science and Technology Summit. Next month. I'll be speaking to members of Congress, representatives from the EPA, and international delegates about sustainable water solutions for developing nations. She reached into her other pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, pristine white with an official seal. She unfolded it carefully, almost reverently. This is my official invitation, she said, holding it up. It arrived 4 weeks ago. The same day I was arrested for trespassing at Westfield Prep. Rachel Kim pulled up yet another document on her laptop. Your Honor, Jasmine Carter has also received early admission offers from MIT, Stanford, and Caltech. Full scholarships to all three. She has a 4.0 GPA despite attending an underfunded public school. She's taught herself advanced physics and calculus using online resources because her school doesn't offer those classes. And she's been volunteering at the community center teaching coding to elementary school kids every Saturday for 2 years. The bailiff, Marcus Johnson, had stopped pretending to be neutral. He was staring at Jasmine with undisguised admiration. Dorothy was sobbing openly now, but they were tears of joy mixed with pain, joy at her granddaughter's achievements, pain at watching her be torn down before the world. Margaret, the court clerk, whispered urgently to Judge Ashford, Your Honor, there's more. The president's science advisor is requesting a full explanation of today's proceedings. The White House press office has been made aware of the live stream. Ma'am, over 200,000 people are watching this right now. Ashford's face cycled through expressions: shock, disbelief, fear, and something that might have been shame. Jasmine looked at the woman who had spent the last 25 minutes systematically destroying her dignity, making assumptions, building a narrative based on prejudice and preconceptions. "Your Honor," Jasmine said softly, and her voice carried a weight that made grown adults flinch. "You said you've been on the bench for 24 years. You said you've seen hundreds of cases like mine. But you haven't seen my case. You never asked about my case. You just saw a black girl in old clothes from the projects and decided you knew everything about who I am and who I'll be." Ashford opened her mouth, but no words came out. "I didn't mention the White House invitation when I was arrested," Jasmine continued. "I didn't mention the competition or the scholarships or any of it. Because I shouldn't have to prove I'm exceptional just to be treated with basic respect. But I guess I was wrong about that." She looked around the courtroom, at the people recording, at her crying grandmother, at the shocked faces of strangers who'd come to see routine proceedings and witnessed something else entirely. "Your Honor," Jasmine said, and now her voice was steady as steel. "Do you still want to tell me about my future?" The letter from the president trembled in Judge Victoria Ashford's hands. In the gallery, someone whispered, "She's going to lose her job." Another voice, "She should lose her job." Keisha's live stream showed the comments flooding in. "This judge needs to be disbarred. Justice for Jasmine. File complaints now. Call the State Bar Association. This is discrimination pure and simple." Margaret leaned down to whisper one more piece of information in Ashford's ear. Whatever she said made the judge close her eyes as if in pain. Rachel Kim stood tall now, no longer tentative or cautious. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges against my client with prejudice. And I formally request that this court's conduct be reviewed by the State Judicial Review Board." The words landed like bombs. Ashford finally found her voice, though it came out as a croak. Perhaps we should take a recess to review." "No." Jasmine's single word stopped the judge cold. "No recess. No review. You had all the information you needed in the brief Ms. Kim filed. You had the facts. You chose to ignore them because they didn't fit the story you wanted to tell about me." She picked up her phone, the one with the cracked screen and taped protector, and held it up. "But that's okay, Your Honor. Because 237,000 people just watched you tell that story. And now they know the truth." The viewer count on Keisha's live stream, 237,429 and climbing. Local news vans were already pulling up to the courthouse. National news outlets were sending alerts: breaking, judge accused of berating teen invited to White House. Somewhere in a government office in Washington, D.C., phones were ringing off the hook. And in Courtroom 7C of the Riverside County Courthouse, Judge Victoria Ashford sat frozen behind her bench, holding a letter from the president, staring at a 17-year-old girl who had just changed everything. "Your Honor," Margaret whispered one final time. "What do you want to do?" But Ashford had no answer. Because in 90 seconds, everything she'd built over 24 years on the bench had come crashing down. Just like the court clerk had warned. The silence in Courtroom 7C was suffocating. Judge Victoria Ashford stared at the presidential letter in her trembling hands, reading and rereading words that seemed impossible. "Dear Judge Ashford, it has come to our attention that Ms. Jasmine Carter, a distinguished guest of the upcoming National Science and Technology Summit, is appearing in your courtroom today. Ms. Carter has been personally invited by the President to present her groundbreaking work on sustainable water purification systems." Margaret Sullivan, the court clerk, watched her judge's face cycle through emotions like a time-lapse of a storm: shock, disbelief, fear, and finally, recognition of what she'd done. "Your Honor," Margaret whispered urgently. "The White House Chief of Staff is on hold. They want an immediate explanation." Ashford's head snapped up. "The Chief of Staff? Line 2. They've been watching the live stream." Keisha Martinez's phone, still broadcasting to 312,000 viewers, captured every tremor in the judge's voice, every bead of sweat forming on her forehead. Rachel Kim stood at the defendant's table, her laptop open, her posture no longer that of an overworked public defender but of an attorney who'd just been handed a winning hand. Your Honor, I believe we need to address the false arrest and the discriminatory statements made during these proceedings. Jasmine remained perfectly still, her grandmother Dorothy sobbing quietly behind her. The girl who'd been called a delinquent, a statistic, a lost cause, now stood as something else entirely, vindicated. Judge Ashford set down the letter with exaggerated care, as if it might explode. She cleared her throat 3 times before words would come. Ms. Carter, there appears to have been some miscommunication about your circumstances. Miscommunication? Jasmine's voice was soft but cut like a razor. Is that what you call it when you spend half an hour telling me I'm worthless? The gallery gasped. Bailiff Marcus Johnson shifted his weight, uncertain whether to intervene but increasingly sympathetic to the teenager. I never said, Ashford began. You said I was heading nowhere. You said kids like me make bad choices. You invented an entire story about my mother being on drugs. You called my home a broken home. You laughed when I mentioned MIT. Jasmine's voice grew stronger with each sentence. You didn't miscommunicate, Your Honor. You communicated perfectly. You showed me exactly what you think of black girls from the projects. Dorothy stood up in the gallery, her voice shaking but clear. Your Honor, my granddaughter has worked 3 times as hard as any other child just to be seen as half as good. She studies until 3 in the morning. She walks 2 miles to the library every day because we can't afford internet. She hasn't bought new clothes in 2 years because every penny goes toward her future. And you looked at her and saw nothing but a criminal. Ma'am, please sit, Ashford started weakly. No. Dorothy's refusal shocked everyone, including herself. I'm a 73-year-old black woman who's worked every day since I was 14. I raised my grandbaby after my daughter died, not from drugs, Your Honor, but from breast cancer when Jasmine was 3 years old. And I won't sit down while you try to minimize what you did to her. The courtroom erupted in applause. Ashford banged her gavel weakly, but no one paid attention. Rachel Kim seized the moment. Your Honor, I'm formally moving to dismiss all charges with prejudice. Additionally, I'm filing a complaint with the State Judicial Review Board citing judicial misconduct, racial bias, and violation of my client's civil rights. I'm also recommending that Ms. Carter pursue a civil suit against this court for defamation, emotional distress, and discrimination. Ashford's face went from white to gray. Ms. Kim, let's not be hasty. Hasty? Rachel's laugh was bitter. We filed our brief 3 weeks ago with all relevant documentation. You chose not to read it. Or perhaps you read it and decided it couldn't possibly be true because it didn't fit your preconceptions. Either way, Your Honor, this is the least hasty action I've ever taken. Margaret leaned down again, whispering frantically. Ashford closed her eyes. What is it? Jasmine asked, her voice carrying clearly. What else did they find? Margaret hesitated, then straightened. Something had changed in her posture, a decision made. She'd served this court for 32 years, but she'd never seen such injustice delivered with such certainty. The White House isn't the only one calling, Margaret said, addressing the courtroom rather than just the judge. The State Bar Association has received 4,847 complaints in the last 15 minutes. The governor's office has requested a full investigation. And CNN, NBC, ABC, and every major news outlet have trucks outside. Keisha's live stream exploded with comments. 4,847 complaints in 15 minutes. This judge is finished good. She deserves it. Justice for Jasmine. Make her apologize on camera. Judge Ashford stood abruptly, her robes swishing. We'll take a 30-minute recess. No, Jasmine said again, and the single word stopped Ashford like a physical barrier. Excuse me? I said no, Your Honor. No recess. No time to call your lawyer or plan your defense. You made me stand here and take it. Now you can stand there and take it. The reversal of power was so complete, so total, that several people in the gallery stood up to get a better view, as if watching history unfold. Ashford's voice hardened with a flash of her old authority. Ms. Carter, I am still the judge in this courtroom. Are you? Jasmine tilted her head slightly. Because from where I'm standing, you're a woman who just destroyed her entire career on camera. You're someone who let prejudice override judgment. You're someone who proved exactly why we need more diversity in the legal system. Rachel Kim pulled up another screen on her laptop. Your Honor, I should inform you that in addition to the White House contact, I've also been in communication with the ACLU, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and the Southern Poverty Law Center. All three organizations have expressed interest in Ms. Carter's case. Ashford sank back into her chair. The fight was draining out of her visibly, like air from a punctured tire. What do you want? She asked finally, her voice barely audible. Jasmine looked at her grandmother, then at Rachel, then at the hundreds of faces in the gallery and the thousands watching online. She thought about every time someone had underestimated her, every time she'd been followed in stores, every time she'd been told to lower her expectations, every time her brilliance had been dismissed as impossible. I want you to tell the truth, Jasmine said quietly. Right now. On camera. I want you to say what you really thought when you saw me walk into this courtroom. Ashford's jaw worked silently. Say it, Jasmine pressed. You made assumptions. What were they? The seconds stretched like hours. Keisha's phone captured every moment, every shift in expression, every person in the gallery leaning forward. Finally, Judge Victoria Ashford spoke, and her voice cracked on the first word. I saw a black teenager in cheap clothes and I assumed you were guilty. I assumed you were from a troubled background. I assumed you had no future worth protecting. She paused, tears threatening. I assumed all of that before you said a single word. And I was wrong about everything. The admission landed like an earthquake. Dorothy buried her face in her hands. Rachel Kim closed her eyes briefly, vindication and sorrow mixing on her face. Bailiff Marcus Johnson nodded slowly, a gesture of respect for truth finally spoken. Jasmine's voice was steady. Why? What? Why did you assume all that? Why did you look at me and see a criminal instead of a person? Ashford was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was raw. Because it's what I've always done. For 24 years, I've been sorting people into categories. Guilty and innocent. Worthy and unworthy. Deserving and undeserving. And somewhere along the way, I started using shortcuts. Appearances. Neighborhoods. Backgrounds. I told myself I was being efficient, experienced. But I was just being prejudiced. The word hung in the air like a confession at trial. Do you know what your assumptions cost me? Jasmine asked. I've been in juvenile detention for 3 days. I missed my meeting with Dr. Chen from the EPA. I missed a scholarship deadline for Caltech. I've been terrified that this arrest would disqualify me from the White House summit. And through all of it, I kept thinking, I didn't do anything wrong. I was invited. I had permission. But none of that mattered because you decided who I was before I opened my mouth. Margaret handed Judge Ashford a tissue. The proud, severe woman who'd ruled this courtroom for 2 decades wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I'm sorry, Ashford whispered. To who? Jasmine challenged. To me? To every other kid who stood where I'm standing and didn't have a White House invitation to prove their worth? To all the people who couldn't defend themselves against your assumptions? Ashford looked up at the teenage girl who'd just stripped away every pretense, every defense, every comfortable lie. To all of you, she said, and her voice carried through the courtroom to the hundreds of thousands watching online. I'm sorry to all of you. 3 months later. The conference room at the Riverside County Courthouse was packed with reporters, cameras, and officials. Judge Victoria Ashford sat at a table with the State Judicial Review Board behind her, her silver hair pulled back, her face drawn but resolute. After extensive review and investigation, the board chair announced, Judge Victoria Ashford has voluntarily resigned from the bench. Additionally, she has agreed to a comprehensive rehabilitation program including bias training, community service, and public education work. The reporters erupted with questions. Ashford raised her hand for quiet. I won't make excuses for what I did, she said clearly. I allowed prejudice to corrupt my judgment. I hurt Jasmine Carter and countless others before her. My resignation is the least of what I owe. What will you do now? A reporter called out. Ashford's smile was sad. I've been invited to work with the state judicial education program. I'll be training new judges on recognizing and confronting implicit bias. I'll be sharing my story, not as a cautionary tale, but as a confession. If my failure can prevent others from making the same mistakes, then maybe some good can come from this. Have you spoken with Jasmine Carter? No. She's requested no contact, and I respect that boundary completely. But I watch her interviews. I read about her accomplishments. And I thank God that she's strong enough to overcome what I put her through. The White House 1 month later. Jasmine Carter stood in the East Room of the White House, wearing a dress her grandmother had saved for 6 months to buy. Around her were senators, scientists, international delegates, and press from around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, the President's science advisor announced, please welcome our youngest presenter, Ms. Jasmine Carter. The applause was thunderous. Jasmine walked to the podium, her heart pounding but her voice steady. Behind her, a screen showed her water purification prototype. 4 months ago, she began, I was arrested for trying to build a better future. I was told I was a criminal, a statistic, a lost cause. I was judged not by my actions but by my appearance, my neighborhood, my circumstances. She paused, letting that sink in. But I'm not here to talk about that courtroom. I'm here to talk about a different kind of justice, environmental justice. Water justice. The justice of making sure every child, in every community, has access to clean water. For the next 30 minutes, Jasmine spoke about her prototype, her research, her vision for sustainable solutions in underserved communities. She spoke with the confidence of someone who'd already faced her worst fear and survived. When she finished, the president himself stood to applaud. Later, in a private meeting, he asked her, Ms. Carter, after everything you've been through, how do you stay hopeful? Jasmine thought about Judge Ashford's resignation, about the thousands of people who'd supported her, about the changes already happening in courtrooms across the country. Because people can change, Mr. President. Systems can change. It's hard and it's slow, but it's possible. Judge Ashford taught me that, not through her prejudice, but through her confession. If someone who'd been doing wrong for 24 years can acknowledge it and try to fix it, then there's hope for all of us. 6 months later. Dorothy Carter sat in the front row of the community center auditorium, watching her granddaughter teach a coding class to 30 elementary school kids. Most of them were from Riverside Gardens, the housing project Judge Ashford had mentioned with such disdain. After class, a small girl approached Jasmine shyly. Miss Jasmine? My mama says you're going to MIT. Is that far away? Jasmine knelt down to the girl's level. Pretty far. But I'll come back every summer to teach you and your friends. And when you're older, maybe you'll go to MIT too. Can kids like me go there? The question pierced Jasmine's heart. Kids like you are going to change the world. Don't let anyone tell you different. Rachel Kim, who'd become not just Jasmine's attorney but her mentor, watched from the doorway. The State Bar Association had given her a special recognition award for her advocacy. She'd used the publicity to launch a nonprofit providing legal support for youth facing discrimination. You know, Rachel said as they walked out together, Judge Ashford asked if she could volunteer here. Teaching kids about the legal system, helping them understand their rights. Jasmine was quiet for a long moment. What do you think I should say? That's entirely up to you. You don't owe her forgiveness. I know. Jasmine looked back at the community center, at the kids streaming out with their parents, at the neighborhood that had shaped her. But maybe forgiveness isn't about what I owe. Maybe it's about what I can give. 1 year later, the Riverside County Courthouse unveiled a new program, the Jasmine Carter Justice Initiative. Every judge in the county was required to complete intensive bias training. Every courtroom now had independent monitors reviewing proceedings for discriminatory patterns. Youth defendants were assigned advocates beyond public defenders. Judge Ashford, no longer wearing robes but dressed in simple professional attire, stood before a class of new judges. "My name is Victoria Ashford," she began. "And I'm going to tell you about the worst day of my career, the day I let prejudice destroy a brilliant young woman's life, and how that young woman saved mine." She played the viral video. The new judges watched in horrified silence as the footage showed Ashford tearing down Jasmine, making assumptions, refusing to listen. "I thought I was a good judge," Ashford said when the video ended. "I thought my experience gave me insight. But it just gave me comfortable patterns of prejudice that I never questioned. Until Jasmine Carter forced me to." "What changed?" a young judge asked. "Everything. I lost my position, my reputation, my certainty about who I was. But I gained something more important, the ability to see my own blindness. And now I spend every day trying to make sure you don't repeat my mistakes." She pulled up a new slide showing Jasmine at the White House, at MIT, speaking at conferences, changing the world one invention at a time. "That's who I almost destroyed. That's who our system almost discarded. How many others have we lost because we judged them by their circumstances rather than their character?" The room sat in heavy silence. 2 years later, Jasmine Carter, now 19 and a sophomore at MIT, returned to Riverside for the dedication of a new science center at her old high school. The building had been funded by a combination of her competition winnings, donations that poured in after her story went viral, and grants from organizations inspired by her work. The crowd at the dedication ceremony was enormous. Dorothy, now 75 but still working part-time, beamed with pride. Rachel Kim sat with other attorneys from her nonprofit. Dr. Benjamin Caldwell, the headmaster who'd first believed in Jasmine, wiped tears from his eyes. And in the back row, wearing simple clothes and sitting quietly, was Victoria Ashford. Jasmine saw her but said nothing during the ceremony. She spoke about access and opportunity, about kids who deserve chances, about systems that needed changing. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Ashford approached slowly. "Miss Carter, I don't expect you to speak to me. I just wanted you to know that I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry for what I put you through." Jasmine looked at the woman who'd once held such power over her. She thought about anger and forgiveness, about justice and mercy, about the kind of person she wanted to be. "Judge Ashford," she said finally, "I heard you've been training new judges. How's that going?" Ashford seemed surprised by the question. "It's humbling. Important. I hope it's making a difference." "It is. I've been following the statistics. Discriminatory dismissals in youth court are down 40% in this county. That's because of your work. It's the least I could do." "No," Jasmine said gently. "The least you could do would be nothing. You're choosing to do more. That matters." She extended her hand. Ashford took it, tears streaming down her face. "I don't forgive you," Jasmine said clearly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did caused real harm. But I see you trying to do better. And I think that's worth acknowledging. That's more grace than I deserve." "Probably," Jasmine agreed. "But maybe grace isn't about deserving. Maybe it's about choosing the kind of world we want to live in." 5 years later, Jasmine Carter, now 24 with a master's degree from MIT and working on her PhD, stood in the United Nations General Assembly. Her water purification system was being implemented in 17 countries. Her company employed over 50 people, most from communities like Riverside Gardens. 5 years ago, she told the assembled delegates, "A judge looked at me and saw nothing but my circumstances. She couldn't imagine that a black girl from public housing might have something valuable to contribute to the world. Her prejudice almost derailed my dreams. She paused, making eye contact across the massive room. But that judge did something rare. She admitted she was wrong. She didn't just apologize, she changed. She spent years trying to fix the system that had enabled her prejudice. And because of her transformation, thousands of young people have received fairer treatment in courtrooms across America. On a screen behind her, statistics showed the impact: reduced juvenile incarceration rates, increased access to legal resources, improved outcomes for defendants of color. This is what accountability looks like. Not just punishment, but transformation. Not just consequences, but change. The judge who hurt me became an advocate for justice. And that taught me something profound: we're all capable of both harm and healing. In a small apartment in Riverside, Dorothy Carter watched the UN speech on her television, tears of pride streaming down her face. She'd lived to see her grandbaby change the world. In a classroom in the county courthouse, Victoria Ashford showed the same speech to a new group of judges in training. At 67, her hair completely white, she'd dedicated her retirement to ensuring no judge would repeat her mistakes. And in courtrooms across America, young people stood before judges who'd been trained in the Jasmine Carter protocols, who'd learned to question their assumptions, who'd been taught that justice required seeing the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. 10 years later, the Jasmine Carter Foundation awarded its 10,000th scholarship to a young person from an underserved community. The ceremony took place at MIT, where Jasmine was now a professor of environmental engineering. In her office, she kept 2 items framed on her wall. The first was the letter from the White House that had changed everything. The second was a note, handwritten, that had arrived 5 years ago. Dear Jasmine, I am dying. Cancer, the doctors say, and there's no more time. I'm writing not to ask for forgiveness, I don't deserve it, but to say thank you. Thank you for showing me who I'd become. Thank you for having the strength to stand up when I tried to tear you down. Thank you for the grace you showed me when you acknowledged my attempts to change. Because of you, I spent the last decade of my life doing work that mattered. I helped change a system that was broken. I became a better person, even if I could never undo the harm I'd caused. You could have destroyed me completely. Instead, you gave me a chance to rebuild. That's a kind of justice I never understood when I was on the bench. I hope you change the world, Jasmine. I believe you will. With profound regret and deeper respect, Victoria Ashford. Jasmine had cried when she received that letter. She'd cried again when she learned of Ashford's death, and again when she spoke at the memorial service, talking about redemption and second chances and the complexity of justice. Now, watching her students file into the lecture hall, students from every background, every circumstance, every corner of the world, she thought about that day in courtroom 7C when everything had changed. Judge Ashford had been wrong about so many things. But she'd been right about one: actions have consequences. The consequence of prejudice had been the near destruction of a brilliant young woman's future. But the consequence of confession, accountability, and genuine change had been transformation, not just for one judge, but for an entire system. And the consequence of a 17-year-old girl refusing to be diminished had been a ripple that spread across the world, creating waves of justice that were still building, still growing, still changing lives. Jasmine began her lecture. Today we're going to talk about systems, environmental systems, social systems, systems of justice. They're all connected. They all require balance. And they all change when someone has the courage to point out what's broken and the wisdom to imagine what could be better. Outside her window, the Charles River flowed toward the ocean, carrying its water to places unknown, just as her story had flowed into the world, changing everything it touched. The letter from the president had opened a door. But it was Jasmine Carter who'd walked through it and held it open for everyone who came after. And she wasn't done yet. Sometimes justice arrives not in a courtroom verdict but in the moment when someone refuses to be diminished. When someone stands up and says, "You're wrong about me." When someone transforms pain into purpose and prejudice into progress. Jasmine Carter's story became a rallying cry for every person who'd been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. It sparked conversations in courtrooms and classrooms, in boardrooms and living rooms, about the assumptions we make and the harm they cause. But more importantly, it proved that change is possible. That people can grow. That systems can be reformed. That one person's courage can light the way for thousands more. Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance or circumstances? Have you ever made assumptions about someone that turned out to be wrong? What can you do today to challenge prejudice in your own life and community? Share your story. Be the change. Stand up for justice. Because the next Jasmine Carter might be the person you meet today. Make sure you see them for who they really are.